Hey guys, it's Max. Good Sunday morning. How's everybody doing? Well, good morning, Jackson. Jackson just woke up and decided to give me a dirty look. I think he's upset with me, so I'm interrupting his sleep. All right. I have a good show for you today, or a good video planned. It's called Could You Live Off of Covered Calls? We go back 10 years and test. All right, to me, selling stock equals destroying wealth. Holding stock forever means accumulating wealth. I have an aversion to selling stock. It's my hang up. I need to get over it. The study tonight shows even more that it's all about total return. And it really doesn't matter where the total return comes from, even if there is a little destruction of wealth. And it's hard for me to say that. I didn't think that was true, but the numbers say different. Well, so one reason I like covered calls so much, because I never ever want to sell stock again. I hate selling stock. It's in my blood. But my hesitation to wanting to sell stock may have caused me to have a blind spot. I want to thank friend of the show, Tom, for pointing out to me that even when using high yielders, an investor will probably have to sell a little stock in retirement. Now, I thought the high yielders were a good idea initially because they would get you around having to sell stock. That isn't totally correct. They do get you around from having to sell as much stock. I'll say that. But if you tried to retire off QYLD, you would have had to sell stock along the way. But it's not all bad news. If you don't QYLD in retirement and tried to retire on it 10 years ago, it started in 2014, you would have done pretty well. You would have more than doubled your account value. At the same time, you paid yourself a salary of $50,000 a year back in 2014, but your salary's gone up as your assets grow. You pay yourself in a maximum retirement model, you pay yourself 5% a year, but it's not set, it's variable. So by the end of the salary, some of these tests were, by the end of the 10-year test, some of these allocations were earning quite a bit more than they started off with. At the same time, all three portfolios, and I'll show you the test in a second, underperformed just selling stock along the way. So maybe XPay isn't such a dumb idea. All right, so to retire in maximum style, here's kind of our baseline assumptions. We're gonna say you have $1 million portfolio, but it could work with a $500,000 or a $2 million portfolio either. But you're gonna pay yourself a 5% yearly draw. If you have $500,000, you're going to start off with $25,000 a year, or about $2,000 a month. That's going to be tight. You're probably going to have to work another job, but for a few years. I'll show you how that works. But on a $2 million account, for instance, you'd pay yourself $100,000. Maybe a husband and wife have a $2 million between the two of them, and they can afford to pay themselves $100,000 initially. $100,000 or $50,000 may not seem like a lot. That's just the starting salary. As your portfolio grows, your salary can too. That's important to remember. This is living the maximum retirement. We're going to shoot for 5% off the get-go. It's a definite 25% improvement off the old school. I said 20% the other day. It's a 25% improvement off the old school 4%, and the old amount's fixed. The variable amount really helps. Wait till you guys see this. Not to mention, the maximum method encourages and incentivizes future account growth. You're also incentivized, just of course, not to drain your accounts early, but if for no other reason, you're hoping the more effective you are at managing your account, the more your salary will grow. The salary you are allowed to pay yourself can grow. I think people that say total return don't count are missing this one thing about total return, and they don't watch my channel. You know, Vince Lombardi, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, said winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. Well, Max says total return isn't everything, it's the only thing. $50,000 a year may not sound like a lot. I've said that before. 10 years ago, you know, this is when it started, but all of these ETFs are paying a higher salary at the end. The winning allocation, the maximum retirement, of course, had the best total return and was paying the owner an income of $219,000 this year in the simulation. Not to mention, and the portfolio was up 4.5 times. Portfolio was up 4.5 times, and your income's up 4.5 times. It's the same thing. Capital appreciation plus income. What's not to like? The worst strategy of the study had a salary of $92,000 at the end of 10 years in current day dollars. And we can adjust for inflation. All of these allocations are making money after inflation. A high salary comes from wealth, not the other way around. Worry about your wealth and the high salary will follow. This is why you shouldn't yield chase, return chase. Return is the true serum. Here's some basic high yield math. So on the QYLD, let's just say 12% is not enough. If you need 50,000 to live off of, then you're going to be selling some growth stocks. Okay, because what does Max say? Max says no more than 20% of the high yield ETFs, just so you don't overload on them, because they aren't perfect. They have problems. So you have 20% of QYLD. Okay, so QYLD pays 12%. You only have a 20% allocation of it. You're getting 20% of 12% or 1/5 of 12%. So QYLD is adding 2.4% to your allocation. So on a $1 million retirement, QYLD will pay for $24,000 of the 50,000 that you need to retire. So you would have to sell stock. That's what Tom, friend of the show, pointed out to me. We're Roundhill and Defiance. Okay, so let's look at this. So this is why I like Roundhill and Defiance more. And this isn't a video about Roundhill and Defiance, but you're going to hear about Roundhill and Defiance. It's not Roundhill and Defiance I like more. It's also Yield Max. It's high yield. I like more money. I like more stuff. So check this out. Roundhill and Defiance pay 30 or 40%, 30 to 50%. So you put 20% of something that's paying 50%, like Defiance, in your portfolio. That comes out to 10% portfolio yield. So then on your $1 million portfolio, you aren't overloaded on high yield funds. And, not at all. And you're making 10%. You don't even need to make 10%. The goal is 5%. So really, with Defiance, you don't even have to use 20%. You could use a 10% allocation. What's 10% of 50%? Yeah, it's 5%. But Roundhill pays 10% of 35%. That's 3.5%. Roundhill does better too. The goal for these portfolios is extra 5%. So you could cut the Roundhill allocation by 5/7. You could cut the Defiance allocation by half. Only using 10% in your high yield portfolio is potentially huge, because we know these ETFs, the high yield ones, have poor total return compared to ones that don't, just normal ETFs. So compared to their low return brethren like QYLD, we don't want to use any more of these than we have to. The true pot of gold at the end of the rainbow comes after 5 or 10 years of compounding. Your accounts tripled in real world value after inflation dollars, and your salary that you were paying yourself $100,000 is now $150,000. This is what total return does for you, and this is what everyone's missing about these high yielders. So let's say you retired in 2014. We aren't going to project this. We'll go back and use real numbers. We'll say you retired in 2014. And we'll put all my assumptions to the test. Okay. So you retired in 2014. You listened to my show, even though it wasn't around back then. And you bought 20% QYLD and kept the rest in growth. We call that portfolio one. Okay. So then let's also say you paid yourself a retirement salary of, where did I get $5,000 a month from? Let's say you paid yourself a retirement salary of $50,000 a year is what that's supposed to say. Let's also just say you set it as a fixed percentage to be withdrawn at 5%. So that first year it was $50,000. Sorry about that typo. All right. So we can make portfolio 2 with the goal of just selling stock as needed for income. So portfolio number 2 would kind of be like the ETF XPay. We're going to do any covered calls. We'll just sell stock. All right. As long as the market goes up faster and you have to sell stock, you can build some wealth that way also. So there's, I'm starting to warm up to that theory. Portfolio 3 is a bull market allocation with a small amount of leverage. It's the maximum retirement. It's designed to do a little better on the way up and worse on the way down. All right. So now we're going to check out the 3 different retirement scenarios in Portfolio Visualizer. All right. So here we go. Actually, this goes back to January 2015. So January 2015, it was good times. Good times. There's the 60-20-20 portfolio with QYLD and the rest in stock and bonds. That's your typical That's what you're supposed to do. You know, that's a good portfolio. You had a great total return, 7.6%, which is about 5% behind the benchmark. The benchmark is the Qs. We're benchmarking everything to the NASDAQ because these are tech funds, or they're NASDAQ based funds. So unfortunately, you're behind the benchmark a little bit. Standard deviation drawdown. Actually, that drawdown's pretty good. Only a 29% drawdown's not bad for the past 10 years. That's actually really good. Okay. So then we have the guy that just sells stock, and he's 100% in the Qs. Now he made 12.6% even after he sold enough stock to pay himself $50,000 a year the first year. $50,000 a year comes to like $4,800 a month. I guess that was $5,000 a month. That's right. 5 times 12. Well, 5 times 12 is 60. So it should have been like 4,200, 4,250. I'll go change it. Okay. Well, 4,250 a month isn't bad. It's not nothing, especially with the chance of some future appreciation. But anyway, just paying yourself, or just keeping it all in growth and selling it off along the way, that's fine too. You had a good total return. Now the maximum retirement, we're gonna have more yield. Max loves yield. We'll do a third yield, a third index, and then we'll use some smart leverage. We'll just use just a little bit of leverage. The leverage will make us do a little better on the way up and a little worse on the way down. And we know that going in. It's not magic. It'll only make more money for us if the market goes up. It still needs the market to go up. Okay. But that's the maximum retirement. And that made about 17%, which beat the index by 4%. It did have a gigantic drawdown though. The drawdown was 50% on this, compared to the drawdown for just selling stock was 35%, or the drawdown for doing the right thing and staying diverse was just 30%. So there's your three choices right there. Now we're going to look at we'll look at all three right here. So I call this one the old school retirement. Well, you turn $1 million into $2 million, and that's after paying yourself that $50,000 every year. Okay, but now let's look what happened to your salary on the old school retirement. Okay, here's your salary on the old school retirement. This is the 5% that you pay. The old school retirement is the dark blue one over the left. You start at $50,000. You had $49,000 in 2015. Then you had you had $49,000. You lost a little bit in 2016. Then you paid yourself $56,000 by 2017. Paid yourself $61,000 by 2018. You paid yourself $64,000 by 2019. That keeps up kind of with inflation. And then we had a lot of inflation in 2020, but then we also had a lot of free money from the government. So then you pay yourself $76,000 in 2020. Just 5 years ago, you started with the salary of $50,000. Your account's growing. Your salary's also growing. A big income comes from wealth, not the other way around. You paid yourself $92,000 by 2021. Now, the bad news is the market went down. And even though you were diverse, 60-20-20, your portfolio lost money. So then the next year, you could only afford to pay yourself $78,000. $78,000 in 2022, starting from $50,000 in 2015. You could retire on that. I mean, I could, especially with just $78,000 with just $1 million portfolios. Pretty good little amount of money. All right, then the next year the market starts rallying again. It pays $82,000, and then the next year it pays you $97,000. Now here's the thing that Tom pointed out that I hadn't noticed, but we're going to notice it today. Right here is how much actual income the portfolio made. The portfolio that's 60-20-20. It had some good income because it had 20% bonds and it had 20% QYLD. Well, it made $30,000. Okay, but remember the scenario of the study is we're gonna sell enough stock to equal $50,000. We're gonna pay ourselves 5%. So it doesn't have to sell the first $30,000 worth of stock because it generates that much income, but it does have to sell 20% of stock. Okay, but I started thinking about that. I don't like to sell stock. That's 2% of your stock. You have 98% of it left. And the next year, the same thing happens. As your salary grows, your dividends grow, but then also you're going to have to pay, it looks like, about 2% a year. And even after that, even after you factor in selling that 2% a year, you still make 7.2% over the course of time. So that's not bad. So now let's look at the other ones. Now, let's go to portfolio 2. Portfolio 2 is just sell stock. Okay, so portfolio 2 that just sell stock, you start with $1 million, you end with 3.2. So you do better. Right, you do 50%, 60% better than the guy that did the old school safe allocation. I will say this though, you had your worst year wasn't as bad as him. I mean, you have some good qualities being diversified. You don't do as bad on the way down, being one of them. You don't do it as well on the way up. But yes, the just selling stock method came out ahead. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Then. But let's see. And the other thing that just selling stock did is he did have to sell quite a bit of stock because he doesn't like high yield, doesn't use any. That's fine, but he only makes $10,000 worth of income from the triple Qs. That's the dividend they pay. So he has to sell about $40,000 worth of stock. But it factors all that in. Even after he sold all that, he still did better than the guy with the diverse portfolio. Okay, so now. But like I say, his worst year was a little bad. He had a higher standard deviation. His standard deviation was 18 instead of 13. Standard deviation is volatility. So it's more volatile just to have the stock. Definitely cuts your volatility to be diverse. Okay. Well, then we have the maximum retirement. He's kind of the best of both worlds because it's diverse and it is well, and you're kind of swinging for the fences. You use just a little bit of smart leverage. Okay, so maximum retirement started with $1 million, was almost at 5 by the end of it. That's because of that little bit of leverage. Now, the downside is the worst year was down 50%, whereas buy and hold was just down 35%. The standard deviation, which is bad. We want a low standard deviation, other things being equal, less volatility. The standard deviation is, about 40% higher than the just selling stock. Anyway, none of these are perfect, but they're just different. So portfolio growth, you can see here what I like. Even when you use smart leverage, even after you get killed in 2022, you're still ahead of the other ones that don't use leverage because they drop too. Okay, so here's the annual portfolio returns with everything considered. Look at this maximum retirement. The maximum retirement, because of the smart leverage, it just does about a third better. It has 30%, leverage, and it just does a little better. Even in a bad year like 2017. Maximum retirement was up 8%. We're just selling stock was up 7. Actually 8.4 compared to 7.1. That's like 20%. It's 20%. It's quite a difference. And then in 2017, when the market went up, just selling stock was up 32%. The market in general was up 32%. Well, maximum retirement was up 52%. Okay, well, then the market was down and maximum retirement was down the most. The market was about even for the year in 2018. Maximum retirement was down 5.25. Then you can see when the market starts going back up, the market recovered. Maximum retirement did too. Anyway, I'm going to share these results with you guys if you guys want to audit them yourself. If you see something that I missed. The maximum retirement makes more income than any of the other two. So you have to sell less stock. That's why it's the maximum retirement. It's more to my liking, but you will still have to sell some stock. The maximum retirement earned an income the first year of $34,678. So it has to sell whatever the difference is between that and $50,000, about $13,000 worth of stock. But that's all factored into the numbers. Look at the max retirement's income. Here at the end, The max retirement's paying $214,000 income. That's what it's earning off its QYLD because its account's growing. And it also earns a little bit off what else? Well, no, that's all it earned. Well, let's see, the maximum retirement. Yeah, it has 33% of QYLD, so it's making a third of 12% because QYLD pays 12%. A third of 12% is 4, so it's getting 4% of its yield from that. So basically, it just to meet the 5% goal, it just has to sell a little more stock to reach the 5%. And of course, QQQ pays a dividend, but it's real small. But the QQQ dividend plus the QYLD 12% that you're getting a third of is doing a job paying most of the income to you. So you don't have to sell that much stock, but you do have to sell stock. Okay, so now I wanted to test it another way to kind of, boy, look at this year though. 2023 maximum retirement was up 83%. All maximum retirement is a third triple Qs, a third Qs, so a third an index fund, and a third a leveraged index fund, triple Qs. Okay, and then it's a third Global X, a covered call fund. Now, the reason I'm using Global X is because Defiance doesn't go back 10 years. To do a 10-year test, we don't have as many choices. I'll do some shorter term tests with Defiance and Roundhill, and you'll see they're even better. But QYLD and the maximum retirement is still a pretty good plan. For 10 years, I've seen worse plans. Okay, so now what I did is I wanted to control for a couple of other factors. So I made 2 new portfolios. We're going to still look at the old school. The old school is going to stay the same. I just duplicated the tab and I varied the portfolios by one thing. Okay, well, I keep mentioning Tom, friend of the show, Tom. He's the one that made me realize that using these high yield funds, you aren't going to get around from having to sell stock totally. It's not going to totally avoid having to sell stock. So, and he said, he likes the idea of saving money, but he thought it was a little bit disingenuous of me to take the money saved from putting it in a high yield fund, the part of the allocation saved, because the high yield fund pays higher, so you can use less of it. And I was putting that into growth. And he said, why not put the extra into bonds? And it's not a bad idea. It's extra safe. So I made this portfolio. It's called the Tom. It's a quarter bonds, a quarter stock, a quarter leverage, and a quarter QYLD. Now, I don't think the real life Tom would necessarily sign off on this, but I just called it Tom because I had the the 0.25% bonds. I added that. So this is basically like the maximum retirement, except it has another element and it's bonds. But anyway, I thought this was really interesting. This is a really good performing portfolio. The Tom does great, and the extra safety from the bonds seems to help. Portfolio return 12%, which ties the benchmark. So it's the same as buy and hold. That's huge to me. Now it does have a little more risk than buy and hold. Buy and hold standard deviation is 18, but it doesn't have as much risk as the maximum portfolio, and still has good return. And then also we have the maximum portfolio. I just wanted to line them up head to head and say, the maximum portfolio still does 17. Okay, so now let's see how the Tom did compared to the old school. The old school turned $1 million into 2. The Tom turned $1 million into 3.2. That's pretty good. The max, of course, $1 million into 4.8. That's pretty good. I mean, the Tom's slightly more volatile. It's not free money. There's no such thing as free money, but it's another allocation a person could look at. Now let's look at the annual withdrawals. Of course, they start at 50,000, but let's see how much they hit the Tom method had to withdraw. Okay, the Tom method makes some pretty good income from the bonds and the QYLDs. The Tom portfolio made 32,000, almost 33,000. So once again, would have to sell just a small amount of stock, 1.4% or something. Oh, we can handle that though. But the good news about the Tom portfolio is look at the income you were able to pay yourself. It starts at 50,000, but by 2018, the Tom's paying themselves 73,000. The next year it's 79. The next year you bust 100,000. It's 103,000, and that's with a pretty safe allocation. Heck, you got 25% bonds and 25% QYLD. You know, that's why I said I don't know if the real Tom would sign off on this portfolio, because the real Tom probably wouldn't put 25% QYLD in there. But there's worse things you could have in there. It's not a bad, it gives you some diversification. It gives you some income. It's not a bad fund. Anyway, and results matter. What does Max say about total return? It isn't everything. It's the only thing. Well, you can see it here. You doubled your salary. You doubled your salary from 2015 to 2020. In 6 years, you doubled your salary. Anyway, I think that's impressive. And that's in retirement. You are not working. And you know, I think that's impressive. Okay, so then the next year, the Tom portfolio pays $140,000 in 2021. Okay, by 2022, we have to cut our lifestyle back a little bit. We only make $109,000, but you aren't, you know, going from 140 to 109. I don't think it would make a person have to go back and get a new job or anything. But then the next year, your income goes up to 116. And then the next year, your income goes up to 150. Wow. So, I mean, the Tom portfolios, I mean, not the worst portfolio I've ever seen. In the last year, when you're making 150, your portfolio is actually making 137. So you actually have to sell $12,000 or $13,000 worth of stock, 1 or 2%. And remember, that's not 1 or 2% on a million. A million's what you used to have. Now you have 3 million. So it's 1.2% on 3 million. Easy peasy, piece of cake. Okay, so now let's talk about the maximum portfolio. So the maximum portfolio is just like the Tom. It's just a third, a third, a third. It's going to be more risky. A third stocks, a third leverage, and then a third income. You know, and obviously the maximum, all these portfolios were put together with hindsight. And I'll say this, all of these portfolios are the Tom and the Max that used a little bit of margin. The Tom used 25% margin, or not margin, 25% what's it called? Leverage, 25% leverage. Well, the Max used 33% of a leverage position. Well, anyway, you can see here, you can see in the returns, the Tom has enhanced returns also due to the leverage. The Tom, the first year made 9%, where buy and hold made 7%, or where the old school made 7%. Well, the old school made 7%. Well, there's buy and hold's the last one, and buy and hold made 9%. Okay. The Tom in the second year made 39%, where buy and hold made 32%. The old school portfolio made 23%. They all lost a little bit, and actually the Tom lost a little bit more due to the leverage. The Tom and the Max were both down a little bit. Market was, a diversified portfolio was down 30 bips. So we'll call that even on the year. The Qs were down 12 bips, or 12. So we'll call that even. Basically, they were even, and the ones with leverage were down a little bit. Okay, they make up for it the next year. Look, the Tom was up 47% that year, where buy and hold was only up 38%, and diversified portfolio was only up 29%. And of course, the Max was up a little bit more. The Tom gave you an edge too. Look at in the down year, though. We have to look at the down year. Down year, the market was down 32.58%. The Tom was down 40% at the worst spot, and the Max was down 48%. And then you can see as the market comes back, so did Tom and Max. I just like this the salary of the last Max. The salary of the last Max was $219,000, and it's not like an outlier. Your salary in 2021 was $191,000. I wanted to show you one other thing in here. You can see the old school portfolio. The dark blue is you, and the light blue is the benchmark. So the old school portfolio, you know, does a little bit worse on the way up, and a little bit not as bad on the way down. Okay, and that's a very standard way, very safe way to allocate money. When you introduce leverage, so here is the Tom. does just maybe about the same in the middle, but as you go to the tails of the distribution, does better. But the cost for that is also does a little worse on the downside. And then the max, but this shows you how in an up market, the maximum portfolio was above the benchmark 76 times out of 77. The Tom was above the benchmark 66 times out of 11. In a down market, the Tom only beat the benchmark 5 times, where the max beat the market 0. But total, max was above the benchmark 76 times and below the benchmark 44 times. So here's the maximum return. You can see it, especially on results on the right tail, because of the leverage, it does a lot better. But at the same time, results on the left tail, it does a lot worse. So when you're using leverage, it's definitely a bet that the market stays bid. People keep buying it. Let's see if there's anything else down here. I'll let you guys go through all this yourselves. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. All right, so we checked out the 3 different portfolios. We actually made 6 different portfolios because I wanted to show some different options. I said the Tom's probably the best all-around option. But I don't know. It depends on your risk tolerance. If you're somebody like some more of everything, somebody that likes, if you're a maximalist, you might be all right with adding a little risk as long as you can do better on the way up. The max might be for you. Talk to your own financial planner. Remember, these portfolios were made with the benefit of hindsight. I know how the past 10 years has turned out. So if it had been a bad past 10 years, I could have built an allocation that was more defensive and it may have done better. And that doesn't make me smart to be able to build an allocation backwards that did well. But those allocations were basic allocations, in my opinion, that should hold up in the future as well. Like I said, not financial advice. If you want to find out for sure, get your own financial planner, and he'll be able to break out a Monte Carlo simulator. He'll be able to look at what you have, how much you're putting in, how much you need to take out, in a very sophisticated manner, and tell you you're going to be all right. I'm going to say, I think if you have $1 million and you can live off 5% a year and you invest, you can invest decently, I think you're going to be all right. But that's not for me to say. All right. Have a good one.